The crash in Sector 12, Dan adjusted his helmet as the dropship shook violently. His unit was heading to Sector 12, a jungle-covered moon on the edge of Galactic Line 3. They had received a distress signal. An unknown ship had crashed, and satellite scans showed no survivors. But orders were orders. Investigate and recover what they could. 5 minutes to drop, the pilot called. Dan nodded and checked his sidearm. He wasn't expecting trouble, just wild terrain and maybe some leftover wreckage. Landed with a hiss, Dan was the first to step out. He felt the thick, humid air press against his suit. The others followed, spreading out in a search pattern. It didn't take long before they found it a massive alien vessel, blackened and half buried in the ground. But what caught Dan's attention wasn't the ship. It was the movement fast, low, and graceful like a predator. Contact. Someone shouted. Blasters were raised. Out of the smoke stepped a figure tall, armored and furious. It was a female alien warrior, unlike any species Dan had seen before. Her skin shimmered with a strange silver-blue hue. She had long braids tied behind her head and glowing markings across her cheeks. Her weapon was pointed at them, but her steps were uneven. She was injured. Dan held out a hand. We're not here to fight. We got your distress signal. Her eyes narrowed. I didn't send anything, human. Her voice was low and sharp, and every word carried a warning. Dan noticed the burn on her side, bleeding slowly under her cracked armor. You're hurt, he said, stepping forward. She snarled instantly. Keep your hands off me, human. Her weapon shook slightly, but not from fear. She was trying to stay upright. Dan didn't flinch. You won't survive long if that wound gets worse. Let me help. The alien warrior hesitated. Her breath came heavy. The others in Dan's squad held their position, unsure whether to back off or intervene. I said no, she repeated. But this time her voice cracked. She took a step backward and collapsed. Dan caught her before she hit the ground. She was surprisingly light, despite her armor. He looked down at her face, furious, proud, and exhausted. She's unconscious, he said. Get the medkit, now. No one argued. She woke with fire in her eyes. The alien warrior's eyes snapped open. Her hand shot forward, grabbing Dan's wrist in a tight grip. Her other hand reached for her weapon, but it wasn't there. Dan stayed. Calm. You're safe. You passed out. We brought you here to treat the wound. She growled low in her throat and pushed his hand away. You touched me again. Dan smiled lightly. I saved your life. You're welcome. She sat up slowly. Her armor was still on, but the chest plate had been loosened for the medics to clean the burn on her side. Fresh bandages wrapped around her ribs. She looked down, surprised that she wasn't bleeding anymore. I didn't give you permission. You didn't exactly have time to say yes, Dan replied. What's your name? She glared at him. You wouldn't be able to pronounce it. Try me. She stayed silent. Dan shrugged. Fine. I'll call you Trouble for now. She blinked. What? He grinned. Fits you. There was a long silence between them. Around the camp, the rest of the squad moved quietly, giving them space. No one dared get close, not after the way she had looked at everyone like a predator. Watching prey. After a moment, she looked away from Dan. You shouldn't have helped me. I'm not your ally. Maybe not, Dan said, but I'm still human. We help those in need. That's how we are. She looked at him again, this time less harsh. That's foolish. You don't even know who I am. He leaned against the supply crate beside her. Then tell me. The warrior didn't speak right away. She looked out past the camp toward the jungle trees. Her face shifted. There was pain there, deeper than the wound in her side. My ship was ambushed. It wasn't an accident. I was targeted. Dan's eyes narrowed. Who did it? She didn't answer directly. I carry something they want, something powerful. Dan's fingers curled slightly around the grip of his sidearm. You're saying someone's coming for you? Yes. Soon? She nodded once. Very. Dan stood up. Then we better be ready. She looked up at him again. Her eyes still fierce, still proud, lingered on his face a little longer than before. You're a strange human. You've no idea, Dan said with a small smile. Just then, a scout ran into camp, breathing hard. Commander motion. Detected. Something big moving fast through the trees. Multiple contacts, heading straight for us. Dan looked down at the alien warrior. You said they'd come. She clenched her fists. And now you're all in danger, because of me. Dan turned to his squad. Get defenses up now. Everyone into positions. We hold the line. He looked back at her one last time. You. Stay here. You're still recovering. But she was already rising to her feet, ignoring the pain in her side. No, this is my fight, and I never run. Dan stared at her for a second, then tossed her a pulse rifle. Then let's make them. Regret chasing you. She caught it midair without blinking dot, and for the first time since she crashed, she almost smiled. Asterisk enemies in the trees. The jungle was no longer quiet. Shadows moved fast between the trees, and the sound of heavy steps echoed all around. The air was thick with tension as the squad crouched behind cover, weapons ready. Dan stood beside the alien warrior, both watching the tree line. Her eyes scanned the forest like a predator, sharp and alert. They're hunters, she whispered. But not just for me. They'll kill all of you too. What do they want? Dan asked, tightening his grip on his weapon. They want this. She pulled a small device from inside her armor. It looked like a glowing crystal, humming with strange energy. It's old tech. My people found it buried in a dead world. The ones chasing me believe it will give them control over minds. Mind? Control? Dan said, shocked. That's not good. No, she said darkly. It's very bad. Suddenly, a shriek rang out, followed by plasma bolts flying through the air. The jungle lit up with blue flashes as tall, armored figures broke through the trees. They had long limbs, glowing red eyes, and wore armor made of dark bone-like plates. Contact. Don shouted. His squad returned fire. The battle was fast and brutal. The creatures moved like shadows, fast and deadly. One soldier went down. Another screamed as a plasma shot grazed his leg. Dan and the alien warrior moved together like they had trained for years. She covered his flank while he picked off targets. Their timing was perfect, each protecting the other without words. One creature charged straight at Dan. He fired, but the blast didn't stop it. Just as it leapt, the alien warrior tackled it midair, slamming it to the ground with a roar. She stabbed her blade into its chest and spun to cover Dan again. He looked at her with wide eyes. You saved me, she shrugged. Don't get used to it. The creatures began to retreat, but not before one turned and spoke in a low, rough voice. We will take her, human, even if we burn this world to the ground. Then they were gone back into the jungle. Silence returned. Smoke rose from scorched leaves. The squad slowly stood, checking wounds and recovering gear. Dan turned to the warrior. You were amazing out there. She looked down, her voice quiet now. I told you, I'm trained to kill. That's what I was made for. He raised an eyebrow. Made? She sighed. I'm not like others. I was created in a lab, genetically built to be stronger, faster, harder. I was meant to serve or destroy, not love. Dan frowned. You're not just a weapon. You have a mind, a will. That means you get to choose who you are. She really looked at him. I don't understand you, human. Your kindness. Your trust. It's just who we are, Dan said softly. She hesitated, her voice low. If I feel something, anything, they'll take me apart. Love is forbidden in my kind. It weakens the mind. That's what they say? Dan took a step closer. Then maybe it's time someone proved them wrong. Their eyes locked for a moment. Something silent passed between them. Not words, but feeling. Then the radio crackled. Commander, long-range sensors are picking up more ships, bigger ones. 10 minutes out. Dan sighed. Of course. It's never over. She turned away, slipping the glowing device back into her armor. Then we'll fight again. But not alone, Dan said. This time she didn't argue. Asterisk the escape plan back at the camp. Tension was thick. Smoke still drifted through the trees, and the injured were being treated. Dan stood by the command table, looking at the sky screen. 3 enemy ships were heading toward them, large, fast, and fully armed. They'll be here in 8 minutes, the scout reported. Dan turned to the alien warrior. She was standing beside the supply crates, cleaning her blade with a torn cloth. Her face was unreadable. They're not stopping, are they? Dan asked. She didn't look up. They never stop. Once they lock onto a target, they hunt until it's theirs or it's dead. Dan folded his arms. Then we have to evacuate. Evacuation won't help, she said. They'll track me, no matter where I go. He walked closer. Then we don't take you on a transport. We send you away differently. We'll use one of the fast pods from the wrecked ship. They're too small to track on radar. She raised an eyebrow. You want me to run? No, Dan said. I want you to live. She looked at him, really looked. And what about you? We'll hold them off. That's our job. Buy you time. You're carrying something too important to let them take. She turned her head. You talk like a leader, not a soldier. I'm both, he replied quietly. A long pause followed. Then, slowly, she nodded. Fine, but only if you promise not to die. Dan smiled, though his heart felt heavy. I'll do my best. Minutes later, the squad gathered at the edge of the jungle, where the alien ship had crashed. The pod had been pulled out and powered up. It was old and beat up, but fast. It would get her off the moon. The warrior stood at the entrance, looking. Back at Dan. I don't like running, she said again. I know, he replied. But this isn't defeat. It's survival. She stepped closer to him, closer than ever before. You've done more for me than anyone in my life. Dan chuckled softly. You say that like you've had a long life. I was built 10 years ago. I've spent most of it training and killing. Dan's smile faded. That's not a life, she nodded. No, it wasn't. But then I met you. For a moment, everything slowed. Even the jungle breeze felt quiet. I don't understand it, she said. But when I look at you, I feel something warm, something dangerous. Maybe it's not danger, Dan whispered. Maybe it's hope. Then the radio buzzed. An enemy landing craft approaching fast. 30 seconds. She clenched her jaw but didn't move. Let me stay. He shook his head. No, you're the reason this story isn't ending yet. She leaned in just close enough to whisper. If I live, I'll come back for you. I'll be waiting, Dan said. Then she stepped into the pod. The hatch closed, the engines hummed, and the small ship burst into the sky just as the trees behind the squad exploded in fire. Enemy dropships landed with force, and new warriors poured out bigger, meaner, and ready to kill. Dan raised his rifle. Positions. We hold them here. No one gets past us. And as the alien warrior's pod vanished into the stars, Dan stood firm, never once looking away from the danger. Because deep down, He believed she would come back. Asterisk. She turned the pod around the yawn. Escape pod shot through the upper atmosphere, shaking violently as it broke free from the moon's gravity. Inside, the alien warrior sat still, eyes locked on the flickering control screen. Her wound throbbed, but she barely noticed. She had escaped, but something inside her twisted. Below, the battle had already begun. Through the rear view of the pod, she could see flashes of light plasma fire, explosions, movement in the trees. She could still see him. Dan, the human who had treated her like more than a weapon. She clenched her fists tightly. Her creators had warned her. Attachment leads to weakness. Emotion leads to betrayal. Love is fatal. But Dan had shown her something different. He hadn't tried to control her. He didn't ask her to change. He simply believed in her. No one had ever done that. And now he was going to die. Her breath trembled. She looked at the tiny glowing crystal in her pocket, the powerful relic that had started it all. She could run. She could take it far away and hide forever, but she'd never forgive herself. With a sharp growl, she slammed her hand against the control panel. The pod jerked. Engines flared. She turned it around back toward the burning forest. On the ground, Dan's squad was barely holding the line. Trees fell, blades clashed. The enemy was smarter this time, more coordinated. They were not hunting. They were executing a plan. Dan fired until his weapon overheated. He ducked behind a broken tree trunk, shouting orders. Hold the left. Don't let them break through. One of his men collapsed beside him. Another screamed from the other side of the ridge. They were outnumbered 5-1. Still, Dan didn't move. His armor was torn. His face was burned. But he kept fighting. Then something roared. Overhead. It wasn't a DROPSHIP. It was the pod. His eyes widened. The alien warrior's pod came down like a meteor, slamming into the ground behind enemy lines. The shockwave knocked several attackers off their feet. The hatch opened. She stepped out, armor gleaming, blade in one hand, the crystal in the other. Get away from him, she shouted. The attackers turned, snarling. But before they could move, she leapt forward. Her blade moved faster than their eyes could track. In seconds, 3 fell. Then 4 more. She became a blur of silver and fire, every strike precise, every motion filled with fury. Dan watched from behind cover, stunned. She came back. She fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. And then, just as one enemy raised a blaster to strike her down, Dan stood and shot it clean through the head. They fought together again, just like before. This time, there were no words, only movement, trust, unity. When the last enemy fell, silence returned. The smoke drifted. The ground was littered with broken weapons and bodies. Dan walked over to her. She was breathing hard, covered in dirt and blood. He smiled. That was the craziest thing you've ever done. She nodded. Yes, and the first thing I've done for someone else. Dan stepped closer. You didn't have to come back. I had to, she said quietly, because when I was up there, all I could think about was you. He looked into her eyes. They were still fierce, still powerful. But now there was softness too. Emotion. She touched the edge of his armor. You're hurt. So are you, he said. They both smiled, and in that moment the jungle didn't matter. The war didn't matter. Only the two of them did. Asterisk. The price of the crystal. The camp was quiet now. Fires had been put out. The wounded were resting, and the remaining soldiers were cleaning up what was left of the battlefield. But Dan's focus was on the woman sitting across from him near the supply crates. The alien warrior silent, still, her eyes on the glowing crystal in her hand. Dan sat beside her. We survived. She nodded slowly. For now. He looked at the crystal. You said it controls minds? Yes, she said, her voice low. But that's only part of it. It doesn't just control minds, it rewrites them. Turns anyone into a loyal servant. That's why they want it. With this, a single empire could take the galaxy without firing a single shot. Dan frowned. Then we destroy it. She closed, her hand tightly around it. I tried. It can't be destroyed by normal means. It's ancient tech older than either of our species. It chooses who can destroy it. Dan raised a brow. Then why are you the one carrying it? She turned, her head, her voice bitter. Because I was made in a lab, like a weapon. They thought I was strong enough to resist its influence. They were wrong. I feel it whispering to me, every moment. But when I'm near you, it's quiet. Dan's heart beat faster. Why me? She looked down. I don't know. Maybe because you're kind or stubborn. Or maybe because you look at me like I'm not just something built for war. Dan smiled softly. Because you aren't. Before she could answer, a shrill sound pierced the air. Everyone turned as a massive shadow passed over the trees. A new ship had arrived larger than any before. It hovered, dark and silent, like a storm cloud waiting to strike. A voice echoed. From the ship, projected across the entire jungle, return the crystal, return the creation, or be erased. Dan stood. They found us again. She rose beside him. This isn't a hunting party. That's a warship from my creators. They've come for me, not just the crystal. Dan's eyes narrowed. They don't care who gets caught in the crossfire. No, she said. They'll burn everything. Another voice came through Dan's coms, his command. All units retreat to evac point. We can't hold against that ship. But Dan didn't move. He looked at her. You don't have to go with them, he said. They'll never stop, Dan. Not unless I surrender. She turned to him, her eyes filled with something more than fear, something like heartbreak. If I go, maybe they'll leave you alone. He stepped in front of her. And if you don't come back, what happens then? She shook her head. Then at least you live. Dan's voice rose. That's not good enough. She flinched. Not from fear, but from how much his words hit her. I fought for you, she whispered. But now I must protect you. Dan stared at her, breathing hard. I didn't fight beside you just to lose you now. She hesitated, her hand trembling. Around the crystal, then she placed it in Dan's palm. You carry it now, she said softly. If they take me, at least the crystal stays safe. Dan's fingers closed around it. No, we're not doing this separately. If we run together. If we fight together. She looked at him. You'll die. Then I'll die next to someone who gave me a reason to care. For the first time, her eyes shimmered not with rage, but emotion. And then, without a word, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his. A warrior's promise. A silent vow. The warship's engines roared. The choice had to be made, fight or flee. Asterisk. The crystal's choice. The jungle trembled beneath the warship's engines. Trees bent from the force, and animals scattered in fear. Dan stood with the alien warrior by his side, the glowing crystal pulsing in his hand. Around them, the squad had already retreated toward the evac zone, but Dan stayed. He wasn't leaving her behind God above them. A light beam began forming beneath the ship. It was a targeting system powerful enough to vaporize everything within. A mile. They're going to fire, she said, voice calm despite the danger. Dan glanced at the crystal. It vibrated now, as if alive. We give this to them, they'll enslave the galaxy. Or they'll destroy this place trying to get it, she replied, staring at the ship. Dan looked at her. Then we need to do something now. Suddenly, The crystal in his hand grew brighter, hotter. The light expanded, forming a ring of glowing energy around them. Dan grunted as the pressure built, but he didn't let go. She looked at him with wide eyes. "It's reacting to you." Dan dropped to one knee, teeth clenched. "What is it doing?" She placed her hand on his shoulder. "It's choosing." The voice from the warship thundered again. "Return the crystal and the creation. Final. Warning." Dan struggled to his feet, still holding the crystal. "I'm not giving you anything." A beam fired Dot. It was huge, bright, and fast, like the sun falling from the sky. But just before it hit, the crystal flared, and the light stopped mid-air. Everything froze. Time itself slowed. Dot then looked around. The trees were still. The wind had stopped. Even the warship hovered in silence. "What's happening?" He whispered. "The alien warrior's eyes shimmered. You connected with it. The crystal is reading your mind, your feelings." Dan looked into her eyes. "Then it knows I'd give my life for you." She stepped closer. "And I'd give mine for yours." The crystal responded. Dot. Its light grew into a sphere, surrounding them both. Dot. Then a deep voice echoed inside their heads, ancient and soft. "Two minds. Two hearts. One bond. Balance found. Destruction denied." And then the crystal shattered. Dot. Not in pieces, but into light. The energy shot upward, striking the warship. Instead of exploding, the ship went dark. Its lights blinked out. Its engines died. It drifted, powerless, across the sky. Seconds later, it fell crashing far beyond the jungle horizon. Dot. Everything returned to motion. Birds sang, wind rustled leaves. The danger was gone. Dan dropped to one knee, breathing hard. What just happened? She helped him stand. The crystal chose, not power, not control. It chose connection. He looked at her. "It chose us?" She nodded. "Together, we were stronger than any army." Dan chuckled. "That's going to be hard to explain in a report." She smirked. "I doubt they'll believe it anyway." Don paused, then stepped closer. "So, what now?" She glanced at the sky. "They'll come again. Others will want the power that was here. And we'll stop them," Dan said. "Together." She tilted her head. "You keep saying together, like it's that simple." He smiled. "You snarled at me when we first met, told me to keep my hands off you." She looked into his eyes. "You didn't listen." "No," he said softly. "And I'm glad I didn't." She stepped even closer now. "Then maybe, just maybe, you can hold my hand this time." He reached out slowly, and she didn't pull away. Their fingers locked. No war, no weapon, no empire could break what had just formed between them. Because the galaxy had feared power, but it never expected love. The end. Asterisk.